kick off? Getting some nods? Yeah. Okay then. Right. Well, good morning everyone, and a very, very warm welcome to today's conference, which is Women and Girls in Sport, Imagine, Believe and Achieve. And they're just such empowering words, aren't they? So you're probably wondering, what on earth have I dialed into the right conference? Why have I got a police officer speaking to me? You are in the right conference, I promise you. My name's Jackie CBE, and I'm the Assistant Chief Constable for Bedfordshire Police. But one of the roles I have nationally is as the Serious Violence Coordinator. And I've been increasingly conscious that so much of the work that we're doing around sport and diversion is focused towards young men and boys. And that might be right in that context, but I do feel that actually girls need to be represented too, really strongly in this arena. And I say that because very recently I dealt with a young 15-year-old girl that had been exploited by a criminal network, and she was keeping a Scorpion submachine gun, so a really nasty machine gun, under her bed with a load of drugs because she didn't feel she had the courage to say no. And I do wonder if she had sport and that opportunity that sport brings you in your life to be able to say no. Personally, sport's made a massive difference in my life, and I know how the difference it can make in terms of leadership, self-awareness, and just your overall fitness and mental health. And so it's in that guise I became involved in the Sports and Recreation Alliance. I volunteer as the director there. And that's an amazing organisation. It's a membership organisation that represents the whole sector of sport and recreation, from badminton to Zumba, movement and dance and athletics. There's a whole amazing range of people working this arena. And what we wanted to do today was start pushing the agenda around the International Working Group, which we'll come on to in a minute, and how we can improve the life of women and girls through sport, through imagining, believing and achieving. So the CEO of the Sports and Recreation Alliance is an amazing woman in and of her own right, the very, very inspirational Lisa Wainwright, who probably needs no introduction to the most of people online here. And she's just going to explain a little bit about why this is so important, why this conference is going to deliver such an important framework for women and girls moving forward, and also how you can get involved in the International Working Group. So Lisa, good morning, and let's hand over to you.
Thank you, Jackie, so much. And as I always say, I only put Jackie on to help us, so that if anybody causes us trouble, she'll arrest you and deal with you. So thank you, Jackie, for the wonderful welcome, and I really appreciate it. I know how busy you are. Thank you again to all of you for joining us today. Again, I appreciate how busy you all are in this new virtual world that we are in, but it's an absolute pleasure to be chairing this morning's session, and also chair of the steering group of the IWB bid group, which I'll come on to a little bit later. Now, usually at conferences, this would be when you'd be having that coffee, you'd be probably rushing to the loo before we start, and you'd be going, hi, how are you? How are you? Not met you for ages, how are you doing? And you'd be having that networking time, and it's quite hard to do that virtually. So I just want to, in my two daughters' words, give a shout out to a few organisations that are on the line. So my shout outs are to a couple of organisations. The International Netball Federation is here, Scottish Women in Sport, the FA Wales Trust, World Lacrosse, the Federation of Irish Sport, the Northern Irish Sports Federation and Forum, Special Olympics GB, British Blind Sport, and many, many, many others. We had over 250 register to join the conference, and many, many of our members. So a big shout out. I shan't read out to you all because we'll be here a very long time, but welcome to you. I genuinely hope you enjoy the day. But before I get to the main part of the conference, you know that these things never happen with a lot of work in the background. I just want to take an opportunity to thank our corporate partners at the Alliance who continue to support us throughout all our work. And I know as passionate as me in relation to women in sport, diversity and inclusion. So a huge thank you to Gately Legal, our partners, D-Cyber, Hayes McIntyre, Howden, Travel Leads, who I'm sure are having some challenging times at this moment, Bluefin, Microtrading and Sport8. You're on the journey with us throughout all our work, so I just want to take this opportunity to thank you. So Jackie mentioned really in terms of my role as CEO at the Alliance, it's quite an interesting one in terms of how I happen to be chairing today and how the Alliance is looking to lead this work. So I just want to give you some context about how this all came about really. Now, some of you may know, if you bear with me on a personal story, some of you may know that I was diagnosed with breast cancer last year. The good news, it's all clear. I've had the operation and got the great news that my mammogram is clear, but that's not the important news. What's more important is during that process when I had no hair and I was feeling pretty low and I had no immune system, I got an email to say, would I like to go to an old girls' lunch at Christmas? And if any of you've been through this, you'll know you're not supposed to go out at Christmas with lots of people because there's lots of bugs. So I decided that my mental health needed a bit of a burst. So I went to London and I went for this lunch. And the fabulous Dr. Anita White was there. And if you know Anita White, you'll know that there's no lunch that's free. And during that lunch, she kind of said to me quietly, as she does, could you imagine, Lisa, if we would kind of pull together a team of people to maybe consider, maybe dream about hosting the International Working Group for Women and Girls. And she left me bald, with chemo going through my veins, exhausted and emotional, thinking, imagine, could we do this? So what is the IWG? Because some of you may not know what the IWG is, and it's the largest network dedicated to empowering women and girls and advancing sport. It's fully aligned to the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals, particularly SDG 5, achieving gender equality and empower all women and girls. And over the last 25 years, the IWG has advocated for greater equality in global sport and physical activity. It continues to lead from a place of respect within sport and physical activity, releasing research and advocating amongst key global stakeholders such as the United Nations, UNESCO, the IOC, the International Olympic Committee, and the International Paralympic Committee. And every 4 years since it started in Brighton in 1994, the IWG has held a World Congress, the largest global gathering of gender equity in sport and physical activity. And the IWG developed and remains the guardian of something called the Brighton plus Helsinki 2014 Declaration on Women and Sport, and now has almost 600 signatories. It also produces an IW progress report tracking progress of those signatories, and today provides the only collective report on these global themes. And later in this conference, Professor Elizabeth Pike will give you some background to those conference reports. Now, the IWG Secretariat and Conference is hosted every 4 years within the period, and this moment in time, New Zealand are the hosts through to 2022. And the question during that very rainy day at that very little cafe in London that Anita asked was, did we believe that the UK could bid to host for the Secretariat and Conference hosting of the IWG between 2022 and 2026? And could we win? So that was me thinking over Christmas and thinking about all the people that had helped me through my career that has enabled me to get to the position as CEO at the Alliance, as well as other roles that I undertake, and all the people that helped me. And I thought it was time that we could re-energise the network, bring about a stronger collaboration, and look forward to driving this both domestically and globally. So in February, I produced a paper with support from Dr. Jackie CBE. We asked the Sport and Recreation Alliance Board to consider if the Sport and Recreation Alliance could lead a collaborative approach to achieving that aim. And to say from that dream now, I have to say we've got in principle support, and I'm absolutely delighted, in principle support from the British Paralympic Association, the British Olympic Association, UK Sport, Sport England, and a number of other partners, including a key partner, Women in Sport, who are co-hosting this conference with us later this afternoon. And during that time, we've established a steering group, and the steering group is as diverse as we could possibly make it, with now 28 members. And that steering group is devising the programme and outcomes for us in relation to the tender document. But this is just the start. So the context is this conference is the start of us really looking at where we are now, where we are today, so that we can determine where we wish to be. And I know in the current climate, that's a difficult view to look at, but we are looking at what outcomes would we want to achieve in relation to women and girls in sport should we be successful in hosting the Secretariat and conference from 2022 to 2026. What would our legacy be? So what I wanted to just go through is really go through the conference programme. You have all received a conference pack, and you'll be able to see the amount of speakers that are coming up. It's just on the slides for you. But as you'll know, with any bid that we put forwards for any elements of our sector, you will know that in any bidding process, you need the sector behind you, you need those stakeholders behind you, as I've just mentioned, you need personal drive, and you also need political commitment to succeed. So with no further ado, I want to introduce you to a key person that will be alongside us through this journey, which is the Right Honourable Caroline Nokes MP, in her role as Chair of Women and Equalities Select Committee from the UK. This is quite a quiet message because she's done it at home, so if you need to ramp up your volume, please do. But over to Caroline to kick off from a government perspective.
To help root out sexism in sport wherever it's found. Hello, I'm Caroline Nokes, Chair of the Women and Equalities Select Committee in Parliament. Health and well-being has never been higher on the political agenda than it is at the moment. But I see it as my committee's job to make sure that it is inclusive of everybody, and that we make sure that women and girls are high on the political agenda too. I know you're all going to do great work in today's conference, but wanted to take this opportunity to wish you every success, and to also say, if you need assistance, then my committee is always there to help root out sexism in sport wherever it's found.
Thank you to the Right Honourable Caroline Nokes, and apologies for the start to that video. We may have a few virtual hiccups, but we'll keep going through. And as she said, she's there to help us, and we will definitely use her. And I just want to highlight before we start our conference partners too. There are so many of you out there, both domestically and internationally, delivering programmes, organisations and advocating for women and girls in sport. And these are just some of the organisations that we've managed to call and say, would you like to be part of today? But as I say, this is the start of the journey for the Alliance and the collaborated programme and approach to the IWG. So if you are an organisation out there that would like to inform us of what you do, please do. But thank you to all the ones listed today. So moving on to the first session of the conference, and the first session is on leadership, female representation at board level. And I'm absolutely delighted to introduce Amanda Bennett, who I've known for a few years now. Amanda was working in rugby and still is when I was working at England Netball. And for many years, she's been a key advocate for this area. And my key memory of Amanda was being interviewed by her for the Women's Leadership Development Programme. Many years ago, and I was absolutely petrified, Amanda, as you recall, on that day. But the good news is I got through the interview and had a 2-year support programme, and I'm sure that is one of the reasons why I've been successful in my career and have still so much more to learn. So Amanda, personally, thank you for all your support, and I look forward to hearing your presentation in relation to leadership and female representation at board level. Thank you, Amanda.
trying to mute. Might have had a little bit of a Wi-Fi issue there, but I'm going to carry on talking. And hopefully, here we go. We're back in the room. So good morning to everybody, and thank you to Lisa for the introduction. As it's an international conference, I will also say Bore da Chigid, Blessed Rewardma. And just to say, this is a brief presentation on the current state All right, well, this is going well, and hopefully, nope. Unfortunately, I'm not able to control the slides from where I am, but I will keep talking. I'm conscious of time, so I will keep talking. Just statistically, we're looking at the moment in terms of English and UK national governing bodies, there's 40% representation by women. And we must, to an extent, fantastic, fantastic. Thank you, Ricky. So statistically, this is what we're looking at in the UK. So 40% and rising. So very, very good to see this. Nothing wrong with striving to achieve parity, of course, closer to 50 or 51%. But if you look at some of the other statistics, when from an ethnic minority representation point of view, that is some way short of the 19.5% of non-white British people in the nation, and why shouldn't they be involved in sports leadership? Similarly, we know that 1 in 5 people declare themselves to have a disability, and yet despite our great success on the Paralympic stage, there are only 5% of our sports leaders on boards have declared a disability. And are we really maximising all that insight, that expertise? And finally, for people to LGBT, we're looking at 3% representation. Now we know that statistically, that's on a national basis closer to 5 to 7%. But equally, we also know that 1 in 3 people who identify as LGBT prefer not to declare their sexual orientation in the workplace. And there are a number of reasons for that, and that's around feeling included, feeling safe, psychological safety, and possibly not wanting to be the victim of workroom banter, of course. So there's some of the statistics. I'm going to move on to what the international picture tells us. I'm not going to talk about this in depth. I think let the statistics speak for themselves. Now, on the one hand, we could argue that the UK is making excellent progress, and I think that we need to be positive where that's found to be true. Some international federations have taken significant steps. They've made policy decisions. They've revised their articles, and you can see there's some on the right. Others still have work to do. And I think we'll look at some of the factors now as to why this might be the situation. So moving on to the next slide. While we are here. Now, normally I will talk about institutional factors, cultural factors, and individual factors. So looking first at those institutionals, the systems and processes. So the lack of a leadership model, what do I mean by that? So too few organisations have defined exactly what they want from their boards and their senior exec teams, what they want them to be, what they want them to look like, competencies, diversity, skills, and knowledge. And really, this leadership model should reflect the purpose of the organisation, its vision, its mission, and obviously building a board from the ground up. And I've been told governing bodies what you get. And this may or may not bear any resemblance to the leadership model that you do with, that's going to really advance and drive the organisational goals. So if there is a leadership model, or even if there isn't, first of all, understand what your current board looks like. To what extent is it diverse? Skills audits, effectiveness reviews, all of those can help build a really rounded picture of where the board is right now. And ideally, you can benchmark it against your leadership model and create a plan to address where there may be gaps in skills, diversity, and so on. Now, I've mentioned role description and person specification. This is not an exhaustive list, by the way, because this is a really simple, practical step that any organisation can take. The role description, in first instance, provides clarity on what the role is, including legal duties and liabilities, collective responsibilities, independent judgment, objectivity, and so on and so forth. The person specification will describe the person, so skills, knowledge, and there'll be a real focus on encouraging candidates from diverse backgrounds. I've mentioned the gender decoder there, and I know organisations have started to use this. Really simple tool, find it online. If you put your role description, PS or advert into the gender decoder, it will tell you whether your language is attractive to women and men or just men. Interestingly, if you use certain languages, you still won't deter men, but you might use other language that will deter women. I'll give you an example. So are you looking for somebody who's determined or somebody who's committed? The first will encourage male applications, but will deter female. The second will encourage both. In the tech industry, it's not unheard of for adverts to be seeking a ninja, whereas what they really want is somebody who's going to bring some creativity and innovation to the room. As we know, despite Crouching Tiger, Hidden Dragon, there aren't many female ninjas out there. And moving on then to exclusive routes to leadership. Now, whilst elections provide an excellent model of democracy, there's a tendency for those electoral processes to require a total adherence to a single pathway. You start in your club, you may move on to a county level committee, you may then become secretary of the region and so on through to national. And this requires people to commit whole swathes, whole years of their lives to entering the single pathway and moving through it and hopefully gaining that nomination, that election. And even the transparency of that process. Is it a tap on the shoulder? Is it a friend nominating you? Is it an open process, an advert, a skills-based process? Is there shortlisting? Is there a nominations committee? The routes to leadership are many and varied, and I would say in many cases should be reviewed on a regular basis to ensure that they are not exclusive but inclusive. And one of the things that features, it's not often written, longevity, you won't see that word in a role description anyway, but you might see extensive experience. So the person with 20 or 30 years in the sport suddenly feels that, that they are the right person, they have served their time, and that comes up in many sports. Let's be clear, longevity does not equate to competence. It's not how long you served, but it's the quality of the time. Have you demonstrated a curiosity? What have you done with that time? Are you committed to learning? Is there some humility? Are you able to be open about what you don't know? And these are leadership qualities that we'd want to see, and they may well have been honed over many years, but simply serving a long time does not automatically make you a competent leader. And moving on then to the next, it's about nominations committees. And increasingly at the national level, we're seeing nominations committees being used as part of the appointments people with the right skills forward to apply. An interesting fact for you here, some research that's coming out from the In Touch network. We're from the FTSE 300, where the nominations committee is chaired by a woman. This seems to correlate to a higher number of women on the board. Maybe not surprising to us. And then moving on to the next bullet, it's about accessibility or inaccessible meetings. It's been reported today in the UK during the pandemic, women spent more than twice as much time on homeschooling children than men. And this has a disproportionate impact on their ability to fulfill other roles, to follow their interests, to volunteer, to achieve their aspirations. So this isn't simply a here and now issue. This is an issue that is day to day for women compared with men in terms of caring and other commitments. When are meetings held? Where are they held? What's the requirement for travel, etc., etc. Some sports have looked at offering childcare. And that should not be anathema. It should be an inclusive process. And then finally, vague succession plan. This is a word I use carefully. A lot of sports will have a succession plan. There's a tendency to think of one out, one in. Somebody served their time, they step off the board. So a few months in advance of that, let's start the process and find the next board member. If you really want to make sure that leadership team is growing and evolving, you need to understand the added value of each person, their skills, their background, do they have access to networks, all that they bring to the table. And then consider, do you want to replace that person? But as the organization itself moves forward, you might want something different. But I think a greater depth and consideration, certainly over time, of what the board looks like, what it is, what it does, will certainly aid succession planning. Okay, moving on. If I may, conscious of time, so this is just one. There are any number of cultural factors that have proved to be blockers for women gaining entry to the boardroom. Those of you who know me know this is one of my favorite pictures. Self-cloning is an issue, and it is an issue not just for older men in black and white photos. It's for all of us. This notion of somebody, want to point somebody to be a good fit, somebody we're comfortable with. And this is where unconscious bias comes into play, and even if it's unintended, this notion that appointing somebody who's very different will in essence create board is not such a bad thing. Somebody asking difficult questions or saying things from a different point of view is highly valuable. It's human nature, but we need to address those implicit associations. Very briefly, I'm not going to talk through all of these, but simply say that this is what it feels like. This is what exclusion feels like when they are experiencing and seeing or witnessing situations, particularly in the workplace or in the sporting environment. And microaggressions are those day-to-day, possibly banter, possibly subtle comments and so on and so forth. And it's like death by a thousand cuts. So the way in which women are experiencing leadership, and that might be in coaching or on the board or in the workplace, this is what it feels like. And the really key point I want to make on this one is that if there is somebody who's different in the room, the onus is not on them to assimilate, to integrate, or to make everybody else feel comfortable. The onus really is on the organization and the majority of people who may look the same to make that individual feel included. And inclusive leadership, inclusive leaders, make a conscious decision every day to do that. So we would like to see our leadership in current sports environment thinking about integration and inclusion, not expecting the other person to assimilate to the status quo. Okay, just on the individual factors, just a couple of things here. I mean, sometimes it's called the confidence gap. And yes, we do need women to continue to step up, to put themselves forward, possibly when they only meet 60% of a role specification from the board. You know, ask yourself, what's the worst that can happen? Maybe you're not appointed, but gosh, what might you learn through that process? What feedback might you get? So we do need women stepping up, and the difference that can make. If we can move on to the next slide. I've been working with sports organizations for over 20 years, and they have told me in no uncertain terms that when they create diverse board and leadership teams, this is what happens. And these are some of the benefits of diverse leadership. It's anecdotal, but this is the reality. This is the reality for sports organizations. Again, I'm not going to talk through them all, but if we can see leaders and sports organization demonstrating that courage of a chair, courage of a chief executive, courage of the organization to do things differently, knowing that there may be disaffection, there may be opposition, there may be reluctance and resistance, the benefits really do outweigh the possible pain along the way. But just returning to that individual courage, if I may, on the next slide. Again, those of you who know me, this is my favorite quote. As somebody who started playing rugby when we were told quite categorically that we weren't allowed and we shouldn't and we must not. We were not well behaved. We were breaking rules. We were doing things that people told us we shouldn't be doing. Now, in this virtual room here, it's packed with women who have made an awful lot of history, and they've shown individual courage, resilience, and perseverance. Keep doing things where people have told them you shouldn't, you mustn't. You're rocking the boat, and we need more women to continue to do that. However, all these things must be taken together: individual courage and resilience, systemic changes, and cultural shifts. So we need our existing leaders to demonstrate their courage. And here are a few examples. Don't worry about the one at the bottom. Here are a few examples of women who've done that. They've broken barriers and they continue to do so. And I'm going to finish there. And hopefully, I'd like to say a huge thank you to everybody who's been listening to this. It has been a bit of a gallop, but hopefully it gives you a snapshot of where we are and why we are in this position at the moment. And what I'd like to think is, hopefully I've teed up seamlessly a transition to a woman who has made history and continues to make history, and to hand over to Annamarie Phelps.
Amanda, thank you so much for that. And I'm going to, well, say thank you, but also continue the gallop quite literally through this. So they say that a picture says 1,000 words. I'm hoping that's, there we are. And this is me. I'm going to give you a continuation really of what Amanda has said, but on a slightly more personal perspective, in terms of what actually does all of what we've just heard mean in practice for us. Why are we still talking about it? We say that every time we meet together as a group of women, and what can and should we be doing about it? So just to really try and prompt some thoughts. This is the last picture of me there was just me going down into the Fleet sewer. So just really, you know, let's get down and get dirty a bit and see what we can pull up. We can move on. This slide, Lisa, with apologies to you, was one of your predecessors, the General Secretary of the CCPR, and I use this quite often because this quote comes from the Guardian newspaper when I was 19 years old. So therefore, I always think that the land and the sporting environment I grew up in was being run and led by people with these sorts of thoughts. It is a quote from the what it means to me is that the people that are my peers, my male peers, also grew up in an environment where people thought this sort of thing and were reading this in our main newspapers. I believe that we've moved on, but I do think still that the historic lack of diversity in sport is very much embedded in our system historically. And until very recently, if we can do the next slide. This is Munich 2013. It was my first European presidents meeting and the first European presidents meeting of European rowing. The one advantage of this was that every time I went to a conference, everybody knew who I was because I was the only female. And whereas they all had to make an effort to meet each other and remember each other's names, everybody knew who I was. So there are some advantages, perhaps. If we can move on to the next one. This is a lovely picture, I always think. The lack of diversity, as I was saying, is embedded in our structure and culture, and it really is genuinely through the historic roots. Sport was set up by men for men, very much around the sort of replacement of violence and war, and identifying the alpha male. In order to change that, we really need to start thinking all over again about sport and how we manage it and how we structure it. I think we also lack consistent data across internationally and across different areas of sport. And there are different ways of measuring things and different ways of defining boards and roles. And so that makes it quite difficult for us. There's also a lack of a visibility of female role models quite often. Certainly when I go abroad to any of the international conferences and things, you can see here that the efforts that the IOC and the Olympic movement have made to encourage women delegates is to invite people who are specifically women delegates. We weren't there as women delegates, actually, these three of us, but we were all chatting and laughing about the fact we were in uniform rather like some of the men, but then found we were standing next to an empty table which had a sign on it saying women delegates here. But in order to make progress, we need to use the levers and use the opportunities that exist. We talk about pathways a lot in sport. I'm not sure that this is the right word. We used to use pipeline. I moved on to pathways. I now think that actually, from a women's perspective, it's really difficult to talk about pathways because we don't have a consistent involvement always with sport or with organisations. We don't gain that longevity, and therefore it is much more difficult for us as women to build the sorts of networks that we need to be able to be elected or to build relationships in that way. So I do think that we need to look more at creating opportunities and providing opportunities for young women so that they can gain credibility and influence. And if they're not seen there, if there aren't those visible role models, then it's really difficult for them to move on. I don't believe there's enough guidance or cajoling at a lower level. So those, identifying and pushing women at club level, particularly in professional sport and also in amateur sport, to take on roles and to do things would be really helpful. We have moved the dial in the UK, and particularly at board level, but if you look below the surface, I'm not convinced that that is a very sustainable flow of women coming up through. So on next slide, please, Ricky. One of the most important things for me in my life has been mentorship, both mentorship and sponsorship actually, but I think it is really important that that mentorship comes from or is very much female specific. I was lucky enough to have Dame Di Ellis as my predecessor at British Rowing, and she really understood and was able to support me through the day-to-day sort of practicalities of being female, being a mother, working, and also trying to help contribute to a sport national governing body. And on her other side actually is Mike Williams, who has acted as a fantastic sponsor in terms of World Rowing for me and being able to sort of push. I've been very lucky to have those, but you need the push and the promote. But I really think we need to think carefully about the sort of female specific mentorship that provides the support that we need to help young women move forward and achieve. Networks, again, incredibly important to women trying to navigate through the sports world. The small number of women in sport really can lead to isolation, and they are often don't receive knowledge or don't receive information that they need in order to be able to be part of things. You're not in the men's changing rooms, you might not be in the bar at the end of the night, but having your own network and being able to share knowledge so that we can grow women and grow their confidence is really important. It's no different to any other sector. The most successful IT companies are those that bring people together to communicate, to think, to brainstorm. And so we really need to be able to do that and break down some of the assumptions around gender. One of the most important things I think also that I heard in Botswana at the last IWG conference was Sam Ransamy, who is an IOC member, who spoke about women, particularly women of colour and gender in sport. And his strong feeling is that, and it shocked me at the time, is that racism in women's sport is much stronger than in male sport. And so we really do need to work harder to ensure that our networks are much more diverse and that we are pulling up women from all sorts of different backgrounds, and particularly those from BAME cultures and women of colour. Quotas and legislated inclusion are also great levers and tools that we can use. I've changed my view enormously on quotas over the years. I used to think that I wouldn't want to be that woman that was selected to meet a percentage on a board. But actually now I truly believe that we will not get any cultural change or behavioural change unless we have some legislative change first. Quotas need to be mandatory and they need to be ambitious. Unless we make it happen, we're not just going to change things, because we need to have those women there to show that they are credible. We had an interesting conversation at the European Olympic Committee's General Assembly last year, where one of the most senior people on the podium refused to accept an amendment to the rules to include women in the nomination process, to ensure that women were included in the nominations process. And the reason he gave was that there just were not enough women who had the credibility to be able to lead sports organisations in Europe, which is really quite shocking in this day and age. So next slide. My conclusion, I suppose, is that the only way forward for us really is to stop trying to bash a square peg into a round hole. There is absolutely no point in teaching women to behave like men in order for us to achieve our targets. The whole point of having women on boards and bringing that different point of view is to be able to create a much more effective, much better diverse thinking group of people, whether it's a board or a club or a working group. And without that, we're not going to move forward. We need a new system that's based on modern career norms, that is skills focused, as Amanda has said, and that has a flexible pace, flexi hours, it's adaptable. We need to have a system in sport that recognises the traits and the strengths that women bring to the table. Relying on women to fit in is just not going to work. And those at the very top need to change and value difference in our boards. Almost last picture then is, this is 2019, so if you think back to that first picture of my 2013 European Presidents meeting, this is Vienna 2019 European Presidents meeting, and these are the female delegates. So we have moved on enormously, certainly in rowing, at an international level, and we are all of these women are highly connected, networked, and do communicate on a regular basis with one another. So it's been a massive step forward. And then if I can have the last slide, please. So this is, as Amanda has her favourite quotes, this is one of my favourite quotes, adapted from George Bernard Shaw. There are many, many barriers and prejudices, but we are recognised in the UK, globally and across grassroots. There are still, we've made huge progress, but there are still some acute problems globally and across grassroots in our sport. We still need to help British women get on the ladder, but we also need to share what we've learnt and to learn to share and support global change if we're going to help our British women when they do get to the top of their organisations, so that they do have the credibility to be able to influence world sport and to make a difference both to themselves and to the investments that we put into sport in this country. So I'm going to leave it there. I hope I've not gone too far over time. Thank you very much, everybody. Thank you, Amanda, and huge thanks to Lisa and everyone at SNRA for organising today.
Thank you, Annamarie, and thank you also to Amanda for a great kickoff. Apologies for the slight technical hitches. They will happen as speeds drop out and things, but thank you so much. I'm reassured to know that, as I've always behaved really badly, that I'm in the right place in this environment. And I think as we go to the panel, there's questions already coming in, so we'll pick up after the research and empowerment session. We'll move to a panel, so please put your questions in, and there's a few already in that we'll come to. But to drive forwards and help global change, as Annamarie says, and as I say, to behave as women, not as men, and to behave badly if we need to drive forwards a change in the agenda. So thank you from a leadership perspective.